This morning's scripture reading is from John chapter 12, verses 20 through 33. Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it, and said that it was thunder. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. The word of the Lord.
So this morning, we continue this journey we've been on with Jesus that we've really been doing all throughout Lent. We started very early in his ministry, and now, if you pay attention to what chapter of John we are reading out of, you'll know that we're actually very near the end of his earthly ministry anyway. And along the way, several things have happened. One of the things that has happened to him over and over and over again is he keeps running into other religious authorities, right? So Jesus is, as we know, a rabbi and a teacher and all of those things. We know him as that today. In his time, people were coming to know him in that way, and this was a challenge. And it was not a challenge necessarily to the people who were partaking in all of his teachings and his miracles and everything that was going on. It was a challenge to the religious authorities who kind of had a monopoly on what they understood to be the truth. They had a monopoly on what they understood to be the right way to access God. And those folks who were sort of in charge of that and were frankly benefiting from it start to get very, very suspicious early on about Jesus. When we talked about the turning of the tables a couple of weeks ago, you see in that moment that the religious leaders in that moment are starting to wonder, well, wait a minute, who are you and why are you doing this and by what authority? That's in chapter 2. Right? So we've gone, several chapters and frankly 3 years of Jesus' ministry, and it's only getting progressively worse until we arrive at this moment, which is in the preparation of the Passover, which is one of the highest and holiest moments in religious life in Jesus' day. So Jesus is in Jerusalem and he's preparing for the Passover with his friends, and crowds are gathering around him, and his fame has grown and people know who he is. And at the end of the section of scripture that ended right before today's passage began, we began reading in verse 20. Well, in verse 19, the religious leaders and the Pharisees start to say out loud how concerned they are because it feels like the whole world is coming to Jesus. They literally just said that. The whole world is coming to Jesus. And before, Jesus has really been in Israel. He's been in Israel, he's been in Judea, he's been around other people of his same religious tradition. Most all of his teachings have taken place in that way. And then we get what starts in verse 20. In verse 20, somebody new shows up. It says there are some Greeks that were there. Some Greeks that were there as part of the Passover. They were there in Jerusalem. And they have come to get an audience with Jesus. They have learned that there's this guy and he's wandering around and he's doing all this cool stuff, and we want to talk to that guy. And so they come and they go to one of the disciples, and then one of the disciples goes to one of the other disciples, and they come to Jesus and they're like, hey, there are some Greeks, some non-Jews, some people who aren't part of us and who we are, who have heard about you, Jesus, and they want to talk to you. And the response, it can almost feel like a brush off, right? It almost feels like Jesus is like brushing them off. And as far as we know, he never actually meets with these people. But instead, he starts talking about how his time has come. Now, one of the things that is sort of a preoccupation with John, and he spends a lot of time, is this idea of signs. Right? Again, we ran into this with the turning of the tables. When Jesus turns over the tables, he does it to fulfill a sign or a prophecy, and people ask him, by what sign do you do this? This is actually one of those moments where a sign is being offered. This thing that Jesus is doing, this thing that he's trying to bring about, this proclamation he's trying to share that we will, call the good news, isn't just being heard by his own people. It's being heard by all sorts of people from everywhere. And now they're showing up. And they want to know more. So Jesus says, oh, the time is upon us, right? And there's this urgency that starts here. And Jesus starts talking about these things that are going to happen, and they're going to happen soon with him. And all this stuff that God is about to do, the stuff that we would eventually know of as Holy Week, we would know as the cross and then the empty tomb. Jesus sees that coming. It's coming soon. And so he has this urgency. His time is coming. His time on earth as it is almost up. And now he has to embrace and help all of his disciples embrace what's coming next. And he says something really interesting. He says his heart is troubled. His heart is troubled by what is about to happen. Now, what's interesting is all of the gospel writers, there are 4 gospels, 4 stories, 4 tellings of the Jesus story, and they all are different, and they all include different details. But there's one thing, there's a handful of things that they all include, sometimes a little differently than each other. One of the things that they all include is some version of this sort of moment, right? Here we have Jesus talking to his disciples, and he says, my heart is troubled. In the other Gospels, we have this moment happening about similar time where Jesus is actually off praying on the Mount of Olives, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's basically asking God if it's at all possible to not do what's about to happen. Let's not do that, right? He says, God, if it's at all possible, let this cup pass from me, right? And so we get this little glimpse that Jesus knows what's coming. And frankly, Jesus isn't sure he wants to do it. And much like when we talked about when Jesus got angry, and that sometimes we're troubled when we have to deal with the fact that Jesus shows emotion. We want Jesus to be stoic. We almost feel like we want him to be a robot, just going through and just taking whatever comes in stride and then just marching on. But when we do that, when we kind of force Jesus into that box, we're doing a disservice, because we're remembering that Jesus is God on earth, that Jesus is fully divine. But we're forgetting that Jesus is also human. He came in the form that you and I have. He came in the same kind of body with all the same frailties and weaknesses that we have. And you don't see it often. But every once in a while you get this glimpse of Jesus' humanity. Like when he weeps at the death of his friend, when he gets angry at the money changers. I have to believe that there were times when Jesus has laughed with his disciples in the evenings around the campfire. And then there's this moment where Jesus is looking at something he knows is important, something he knows needs to be done, something that's going to have a great impact, not really even on his life, but a great impact on everybody else's life, and in fact, the whole world. Jesus is looking at that and saying, the path from here to there looks really difficult. The path from this point where I am to that point looks really hard. Is there any other way, God? My heart is troubled. Let this cup pass from me. Is there any other way we can get this done? And then immediately, both here in John and in the other Gospels as well, the very next thought is some version of, but not my will, but yours. If this is what needs to be, then so be it. If this is the road that needs to be walked, then so be it. God, give me the strength to do what needs doing. And then in John's version, we get this moment where God's voice actually comes down, and Jesus and everybody hears it. Jesus, you have been glorified and you will be glorified. Basically, here's the strength you are looking for. Here's what everyone else needs to hear. You know, here's what's going on. God's like, yes, you need to walk a path, and you will be glorified in doing it. Now, in life, we run into these situations. We run into these situations probably more often than we want to admit. Life gives us something to do that, frankly, we don't want to do. And it may be good for us, and it may be good for other people. It may be a challenge that's worthy to take on and honorable and noble, but it doesn't mean we want to do it because we've got other things to do. We're living our lives. We have stuff. We have dreams. We have goals. And here's something else that just drops in our lap. Something we have to deal with. When I was 23, had a moment like this. And it was the moment when we kind of first out of school, and my wife noticed that we actually had really good health insurance for the first time, and decided we all needed to go to the doctor. And I'm like, I'm not sick. I feel fine. I don't need to go to the doctor. Well, my protest lasted about a week and a half, as you would expect, and I ended up going to the doctor. Like I should. And while I was, and so we go to the doctor and they do all the tests and you're just there for a physical and they take your blood, which I hate. My veins are like at the bottom of my elbow, so it just takes them forever to find one. And so, you know, and so they do all that and they run it off to testing, and literally like the next day I hop on a plane and away I go. And then I get a phone call a couple days later and says, hey, something's weird on one of your tests. Your blood sugar is crazy. But, you know, we want to confirm it, so please come back in. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm on the road. I'll come back. So I come back a week later, take my blood again. And they run the test again, and they go, oh, yep, you have type 2 diabetes, and it's actually pretty bad. For those of you in the know, my A1C was 13.5. Which is more than double, by the way, for those of you not in the know, what it should be. And that started me on this journey. And you know, at that point, you know, it's, you know, Google is a thing, so you're Googling stuff and you're reading about all these things that could happen and all the bad things and what you need to do and what you don't need to do. And I was just like, oh, this is terrible. Like, one of the things I love about being on the road, you know, and getting to go is you get to visit all these places and you get to eat all this interesting food. But look at all these foods they want to take away from me now. Look at all these things they want me to do and all these things they don't want me to do, and I need to take this medication and I need to do this and I can't have bread, and oh my God, bread is so delicious. I don't want to do this. And I would go for years through peaks and valleys of doing really well and then basically getting really tired of it all and then getting really low and going, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was doing it mostly in secret. I wouldn't tell people unless I absolutely had to what was going on. I wouldn't tell people that that I had this condition. I wouldn't tell people why, I couldn't order we didn't want to try their pasta, right? I didn't tell people that because I didn't want them to know. It needed to be something that I was going to do, and really, quite frankly, I felt shame. I felt shame about it. I didn't want people to judge me because of what was going on, because I thought for somehow this was my fault, that I had broke myself or something like that. And did this for years and years and years and years. And after about 10 years of it, I actually had a couple of conversations with folks where it came up, and I decided to trust them and said, well, actually I have type 2 diabetes. And both of these folks looked at me and said, oh, so do I. And I was like, really? And then we would start to talk and kind of compare notes about what it was like for me and what it was like for them, and what worked for them and what worked for me. And it felt really nice to have someone to talk to. And I kept having a couple of those experiences over and over again. And there's a light bulb that went off in my head and says, oh, nobody talks about this. There are 10 million people in this world with this condition, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody talks to each other about it. There's no Alcoholic Anonymous for people who have diabetes to get together and support each other. There's so much silence around it because there's stigma around it, and that still exists today. And then I decided I need to do something about this. I need to find a way to share my story so that other people can know that they're not alone. And I will tell you that was a really hard decision to make, because then once I realized that, I was like, but I don't want to, if I share my story, I got to share my story honestly, and I got to talk about all the times I've failed and the places where I did feel ashamed, and occasionally still do feel shame. I've got to be honest and forthcoming. And do I really want to do that? And that sounds hard, and I want to let everybody into that part of my life. And eventually I would say I did. I decided I needed to do that. And what came out of this was actually a book that I ended up writing called Rotten Hobby. Now, I'd like to tell you that I wrote this book and it became this big thing and everybody read it and everything. No, that's not true. As is the case with most books, a few people did. I know a couple of churches who did studies on them, and I would get notes probably for the first year after it came out from mostly people I know who had found a copy or discovered it or read a copy and told me how much they appreciated it. It didn't start, a revolution or start any kind of larger national conversation, but it did feel good to me to put down in words what was going on. It did feel good to me to take on that challenge. And it did feel good that at least some number of people, even if just a handful, people I might never meet, and most probably I won't, if they took a little hope and a little inspiration for it, then great. That's sometimes the best, not just all we can do. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Jesus has a mission. Jesus knows where he needs to go. He knows it's a hard road to get there. And he chooses to do it anyway. We face these moments in life. Jesus looked for strength from God. We are offered strength for these moments. Now, I'm not the only one who had these experiences. I'm sure many of you have had these experiences. Another person who's had these experiences, the person we will be interviewing for our interview portion today, and I'm excited to have him here with us. So let's go do that now.
So for the interview portion of our service today, we're actually blessed to have Gary Lebsack with us. Gary is a longtime member of our church, longtime viewer of the live stream. He was viewing the live stream before it was cool right now, as you all are, and has worn different hats in our church, but right now actually wears a really important hat in our community. He's also the mayor of Johnstown. So I've been blessed to get to know Gary over the last couple of years, and so he's agreed to be with us today. I asked you a couple of, I think kind of hard questions. These have all been kind of hard questions, I realize, and I think Gary, you might have some of the hardest ones so far. which is, I think the question I asked you is, do you remember a time when you needed to do something, but you didn't want to do it? 'Cause that's kind of what we're talking about today. Jesus has something he knows he needs to do, but he doesn't want to do it. You ever face that situation?
I have about 10,000 times in my life. And that's why this is a hard question, because which one do I pick? And I have a real quick one, and I don't know the outcome, but something that's been very hard recently was to come out and say that the town of Johnstown's under an emergency order. That was hard for me because I didn't know what was going to happen with our downtown businesses and for people that were, needing the income, and I didn't know if it was going to shut it off, what was going to happen. But we went ahead and did it, but I can't tell you what the outcome's going to be or what the outcome is. But hopefully it did release some federal funds that people can now apply for, so hopefully that's okay. But the big thing in my life, after thinking about it, happened when I was in Vietnam, and I was in charge of an aircraft, and I had to be sure that aircraft was an Uber aircraft, basically. We delivered troops, we delivered goods, we were the lifeline to the forward fighting troops in Vietnam. And my airplane broke down one day, and it needed an airspeed indicator, and there was none in country. We didn't know what to do, couldn't fly without it. And somebody said, well, I know where there's a downed C-123 out in the jungle, and it's probably got all the instruments in it. We just couldn't recover it. So they load Gary up with his M16 in his tool bag and fly me out there and drop me off. And I thought, well, I really don't want to walk through the jungle alone to get this part. But something told me, I guess when you're young, 22 years old, you feel like maybe you're invincible and everything's good. And so I did. I walked out there. Luckily I didn't step on anything, and I didn't get bit by anything, and I found the airplane, did half the instrument I needed. So I got it out, and I walked back, and I got back to base. But that has haunted me ever since, because, it very well could have turned out differently. There was booby traps everywhere in that country. You didn't know what was there. And so that's something that I did. I knew I probably shouldn't have done, but I did it. And the outcome, thank goodness, with a lot of praying walking through that jungle. They always say war makes everybody a Christian, because everybody prays at that time. But that's the big thing for me.
I think sometimes those, to be honest, never been in a situation even close to that, I have to tell you. But it's being in that environment where you know there's danger around you, but you can't see it. In many ways, it's maybe not the best comparison, but it's not unlike what we're dealing with right now.
No, you're
which
exactly
is
right.
there's danger around us. This, even if it's not going to affect us, it might affect somebody we love. So we have to take precautions and but you can't see it. And I think the not being able to see what may be coming for you is even worse in a lot of ways. And sometimes we don't even realize the risks we're taking until after the fact.
No, you're exactly right.
Right.
You're exactly right. And I've always wondered, why was I spared, and why did I get to come home and so many didn't?
Sure.
Those are things I think that every veteran of that war, or any war, will always keep with them and wonder.
How could you not? How could you not? Right.
Yeah.
So where, you already alluded a little bit to it. Sometimes I think when we're young, we just don't really even know how to calculate risk well, and know what we're doing. But obviously that was a moment that did take some strength. You knew that you were doing something that was, potentially very dangerous. Do you remember where you found strength in that moment, or where you find strength today?
Honestly, I prayed a lot over there, and I pray a lot anyway, but I just, that's where I find my strength. I find my strength daily from the people that I work with, that surround me, that give me the strength that I need. You're aware of what happened in my life about a month ago, and I'm just so thankful, and I draw a lot of strength from my support system.
Yeah, I think I think right now that's the most important thing we can continue to do for each other. Because we can't be together in person, but we can call and we can get on calls like this and make sure that we're still supporting each other.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, I will tell you, I take comfort in knowing, living in this community, that someone like you and the others are making thoughtful but hard decisions on our behalf, and to keep us all safe. And so I just want to say thank you for that. It means a lot to me, and it's great to have people whose judgment I trust. And you're right with your kind of first story. The businesses around us, they're not just businesses, they're people. Like, I know a lot of the folks now who own these stores or work in these stores, you even more so. But there is this kind of time of sacrifice we're all going through. So thank you for your leadership in this community and for all that you do. Appreciate it. So thanks for taking the time with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that really was an amazing conversation. And in fact, it continued after I turned the recording off. I wish I'd kept recording. There was more good stuff. But right now, in this moment, we are all living a mission. We've all been given a mission that none of us asked for, that frankly, I don't think any of us want. Right? I mean, and in many ways, we are living Lent in such a real, intangible way that hasn't really been done probably in decades. Because currently we're all sacrificing. We're all giving up, right? We're giving up going outside. We're giving up meeting with our friends. Some of us have given up a whole lot more. Some of us have small businesses that are now going to struggle. Some of us have lost jobs or been furloughed, right? We are all sacrificing. We're all giving something up, probably not for our own benefit, not because we're the ones who are going to get sick, not because we're the ones that are going to end up in the hospital, but because some nameless people that we don't yet know and probably never will could. We are part of a collective mission, a collective sacrifice, a collective hard road that we really don't want to walk down in order for there to be more light and more life at the other end. We are living the road that Jesus walked. Jesus walked his road so there could be more life and more light on the other side of it, and that is exactly what we are doing now. We are sacrificing, not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of our community and those around us and who we love and who we care about, so that on the other side of it, there can be more light and there can be more life. We have really been given a holy and sacred mission in these days and weeks to come. And it is my hope and prayer that we embrace all of that is, that we remember the sacrifices that others have made for us, what people who serve in our armed forces have sacrificed, what our farmers and ranchers continually sacrifice, what our doctors and nurses and teachers are sacrificing on behalf of us and our children right now. That we remember all of that and embrace the road that we have been given to walk in the days and the weeks to come. Because if we do, yes, there will be hardship. Yes, things will feel dark for a while. But God promises over and over and over again that there's light at the end. And we need to look no further than the example of his Son. So let us look forward to that light. Let us look forward to the eternal life, the life abundant we are all called to, and embrace the mission that we are given today. Amen.